Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine the show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Matt W., Matthias S., at Uranium Invest R, at Thomas 824-19172, Eric K, Andrew C, Chris T, and Solomon F. George Glasier is back on the show with us. George is Director, President, and CEO of Western Uranium and Vanadium, a U.S.-focused uranium explorer and developer advancing the Sunday Mine project, among other projects in Utah and Colorado. The company is listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol WUC and also US OTC markets under the symbol WSTRF. George, welcome back, and how are you doing?
Oh, real good. Thank you. Good to be back.
Well, George, we got a lot of questions from the audience. I've cut most of my questions out for the sake of time, but let's get to the matters probably most on investors' minds at the moment and a critically important matter for Western. What is the company doing to fully prove compliance with the state of Colorado Reclamation Mining Division, and will the company lose these key assets?
Well, of course, as you know, the hearings have been scheduled for April 22nd and 23rd to consider the status of the permits on the 5 mines at the Sunday complex. And we truly and clearly believe and have evidence that they are active mines. At least 4. Probably all 5 of them will be declared active at that hearing by the board. If you take a look at the first notice, they on their own motion decided to delay it for a month. And part of that, if you read their notice, they want to have a pre-conference hearing. And the reason for that, obviously, we've lined up expert witnesses. We've lined up, our counsel to be there. And so this is a serious thing, and they've got to take it seriously. But we think, the facts of the situation and the current regulations in place clearly indicate that the Sunday Mine Complex is active, especially because of what has been done clear back in 2013, as well as what we recently did this summer. If you take a look at our press releases, we opened the mine, we did development in the mine, we actually mined ore, we stockpiled it in the mine. And if you take a look at the various, correspondence with the division, the reason we didn't take the ore out is there was a couple of things we had to comply with, which we're finishing up that. Actually, the ore pads were the last thing, and those ore pads will be completed, and the final engineering report will be done tomorrow. So we're on track for that hearing in April to show the board that we are an active mine, and it should be determined to be in active status.
And is it your position, George, that compliance has been met for all of the mining operations, or is it just for some specific work done at certain parts of the Sunday Mine Complex? Can you give us a little more detail on when those compliances were done?
It was done. We started the mine this last summer. We opened 4 of the 5 mines, the portals of 4 or 5. We were in 4 or 5 of the mines actively developing and mining. So those are the 4 or 5 mines. It's public information. We were going to open the Topaz, which was the 5th of them. And we went, obviously, to the BLM, and we gave notice we were going to open. And the BLM came back and says, we're not sure what kind of plan of operation we have on file for the Topaz, even though the Topaz was operated in 2009 under some kind of plan with the BLM. Well, they, after probably a month of searching their files, couldn't find a plan of operation for the Topaz. So they advised us not to do anything except nominal activities in the mine. So we did not open the Topaz under the order of the BLM. So there's a good cause there that says we could have opened it and done exactly the same thing, except for the BLM, advised us at the last minute. And we were relying on the fact that there was a plan of operations in place when they operated in 2009 and 10. So again, that's one that physically was not open, but certainly we could argue that it would have been active except for that order. Now, whether that flies, I don't know. But the other 4 were clearly open. And the topaz is, of all the 5 mines, the topaz is the least important, for early production. We can certainly, we're working on a new plan of operation. We started that almost immediately after the BLM advised us that they had no current plan of operation. So our consultants are working on that now, and that should be submitted shortly to the BLM. So that will be satisfied. And again, the status of that mine is, maybe the only one that wasn't physically active this last summer. The others clearly were. But we did other activities there. We've done other things at the topaz, which, no doubt when they finally do this new rulemaking, the state of Colorado to determine what constitutes, activity in a mine, that's going to include more than just ore mining. But we mined ore. So, even if it's limited to that, which we don't think that would be the case. And everybody that we've talked to indicates that there's got to be a broader definition of what an active mine is, because you could be developing, and it could take you, big mines, it could take you 10 years or more to develop a mine before you're even ready to produce ore. So we think the standards, which will be set probably not, maybe a year from now, will include a number of activities which basically constitute active mining.
And George, I'm assuming that some of the opening activities that have gone on starting last year in 2019, that was done in anticipation of this issue coming up, where the agency has been claiming that since 2009, there's been no activity. So can you speak to your relationship with the agency?
Well, clearly what happened is, our company also owns the Van 4, which was a permitted mine and then gone into temporary cessation. And we, bought that mine from Energy Fuels in 2014, and there was the first of a 5-year temporary cessation order in place, and so that expired. And in 2018, we applied for and were granted a second temporary cessation by the board. Well, that's the one that led to this challenge, and of course, the anti-mining people challenged that decision of the board. They went to district court in Colorado, and the district court sided with the commission and said, yes, that's right. You've got the regulations that say you can have 2 5-year temporary cessations, and that's what you did. So you followed your regulations. The mine is still considered in that status. Well, they took that to the appellate court in Colorado, and the Court of Appeals found a little bit differently. They said, well, it shouldn't be just the issue of the temporary cessation. It should be the physical activity that takes place. If there's no physical activity, and they didn't define that, but if there's no physical activity in 10 years, then the mine should be declared inactive and go into reclamation. So with that decision of the appellate court, we decided, okay, we will have activity at the Sunday mine. We won't rely on this 2 5-year temporary cessation arrangements. And so that was part of the reason, not the only reason we went into production last summer. We went into production also because we had a demand for the ore. And so we did it for 2 reasons. We would have done it with or without that court order, but that certainly was one of the things. And I think there are other mines in Colorado that are facing the same situation, and I don't know what they're doing because there's been a number of mines that haven't had physical activity for the 10-year period that are in their temporary cessation, and I don't know what will happen to those. I suppose they're all going to have to go in and defend this status and tell the state what they've done or what they haven't done to maintain or not maintain that status. But I think we're clearly the front runner in this because we clearly have done things. And the other mines, I'm not sure what they'll do. I've heard rumors that some of them are going to concede they haven't done anything for 10 years and go into reclamation. Some of them probably will basically say they have had activity that constitute active mining. But that's what led partially to us doing it. But we also, because of the high price of vanadium, we're going to open the mine anyway. We had planned to open the mine. We'd done the things to open the mine way before that decision came out. So before the decision came out by the court, we were already planning to open in the summer. And as you recall, if you go back and look at the requirements to open the mine, one of them was to cover the low-grade stockpile, which, we did. That was not a permit requirement, but the division decided that would be something that they would like us to do, and they requested us to do that before we opened mine. So we did that. And if you'll recall, the press releases shows that we did that. We got that approved by the state, and then we opened the mine. But we could have opened the mine, our own, without doing that. But we honored the request of the state to cover that low-grade stockpile, and then we opened the mine.
And with the current rules and with the reopening of the 4 mines at Sunday last year, that was within the 10-year time frame that the agency continues to hang its hat on. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And George, speak to the relationship with the agency that you have, and is it sufficient to get this matter resolved for both the benefit of the agency and the company?
Well, our relationship, with the agency are good. They've complimented us on what we've done out there. They inspected the ore pads while they were under construction. They said we're doing a great job. Every time they inspect, everything is just right, and the minor things that are not, we fix. So we've got very good relationships with the agencies, at the staff level. Of course, other than the Van 4, we have not been in front of the board, for any requests or for any determinations. And that when we went in front with the Van 4, obviously, the board ruled, on their regulations. So I think our relations are fine, but we don't rely on the relationship. We rely on the law and the facts, and that's why we'll win.
Very well. And with the Van 4 mine, can you speak a little bit more to that? If the agency pushes for reclamation of Van 4, how will the company deal with that, and can it be avoided?
Well, I don't think so. I think the court has ordered the agency or the board to basically revoke the operating permit and put it into reclamation status. And we have not had a formal notice yet of that, but we understand that probably will be coming in the next 30 to 90 days. When we get that formal notice, we will put the mine into reclamation. Now, there's already a reclamation plan, and there's a bond up for the reclamation. So, I don't think there's any reason to try to fight it. They decided, the board, which was their call, not to appeal the Court of Appeals decision to the Colorado Supreme Court. So as far as we're concerned, that is now where the board is, and we're going to probably start reclaiming the Van 4 in the next year, and over a period of time, the Van 4 will be reclaimed. Now, you can start to re-permit. Interestingly, you can go in and start re-permitting any time if we wanted to. But the Van 4 being a lower priority, we probably wouldn't do that. And the reclamation cost is not that great, and probably if we really went at it quickly, we could reclaim it fairly quickly. But if you take a look at the Van 4, there's buildings out there, there's a head frame and a hoist and that's not difficult to reclaim, and there's not a lot of surface disturbance at the Van 4. So the bond is $75,000, so you can see that more than covers the reclamation cost of the Van 4. And then when it's reclaimed, we get our bond back. So there'll be cash out of our pocket to start with, but then when the reclamation is done, we get our bond back. And of course, if you know how the state bonds, they bond for outside contractors to do the work, plus, additional amounts so that they're well covered. So, the $75,000 in the bond is more well beyond what it'll cost for us to do the reclamation.
Okay. And can you speak for how long do you have to do that reclamation work? Can you just speak to if it's a couple of years you have to do that? Or what's the time?
I would guess the board's going to say a couple of years, because what happens is, they're going to come in and say, okay, you've got a couple of years to do the reclamation, start it, do the first things, but do it over a reasonable period of time. You want to be doing certain things when the weather's right. The summer's a good time to do some of it. So, in the wintertime when the ground is wet and snows there, you probably don't want to do a lot of surface work. So, yeah, they'll give us an adequate amount of time, I'm sure.
Okay. And what is the plan if permits get pulled at Sunday? How long and at what cost would it take to get a successful outcome on the issues, George?
Well, that's an interesting question. Of course, we can always do the same thing. We can go in and challenge the decision of the board in the court. That's the remedy you have. So, the board, if they ruled against us, we've got the right to go to court and have the court determine. That's a long process, does cost money, or we can start re-permitting. Interestingly enough, the BLM hasn't revoked the plan of operations for those 4 mines. So typically, permitting mines in Colorado, you go through the two-step process, the state and the BLM, since we're on BLM land. Well,
Right.
the BLM is always a longer process because of the EA and things like that. So to re-permit these mines where there's already disturbance there and there's already all the background data, we've got all the monitor wells in, all of that is already there. It's not something you have to do. It wouldn't, I can't tell you how long it would take or how much money, but it's not going to be, even if we re-permitted the mines, it wouldn't be a major undertaking, either cost or time. We would be ready to produce, again, the market doesn't justify a lot of production right now. Uranium is still, $25? And I suppose one of your questions may be, what do we think about the government plan to buy uranium? Well, that could drive prices up to where the Sunday mine would be a logical candidate to be producing into that whatever it is the government's going to do.
Yes, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. It's coming right up. Can you speak to how much uranium material and vanadium material has been stockpiled in total at this point, George, at the Sunday complex since recent activity?
Well, it's stockpiled in the mines. It's a good quantity of it, and it's stockpiled in the mines, and we're limited by how much space we have in the mines because of the order of the division not to take it out till we had ore pads. So, it's not thousands of tons because there's not room for thousands of tons in there, but it's a significant quantity. And we didn't measure it in tonnage. It's the ore trucks or the mine trucks brought it out and put it in places where we could store it and, until we opened the portals. But it's a significant quantity. But it's certainly a significant quantity, but I don't have the exact quantity because we didn't quantify it.
Okay.
Number of trucks dumped. So it's a significant amount. It's not thousands of tons because there's no room to store thousands of tons in the mines.
Okay. And now is it sufficient for the agency? And what is the status of the ore pads at this point? Are they almost complete?
Now, the ore pads are complete. The inspection by our engineer and the independent certification that they were built as approved happens tomorrow. We will report that to the division within a couple of days for their final sign-off on it. So the ore pads are complete as of now. So they're done. But, again, we'll wait. The division has told us, well, don't open the mines until they take a look and put their stamp of approval on the ore pads. And they may very well come out and look at them again. They were out there once. And that's fine. So how long that takes is just probably a matter of days or weeks. It's not a lengthy process. And then we can open the mines and take the ore or whatever we want, put it on the ore pads. But we don't need that. We don't think that constitutes activity. Anything what we already did is active, whether you put it on the ore pads. But we do have some samples we want to ship, to various places of that ore. So it would be good to get some of it out of the mines. And that was the whole purpose of it, as we announced last summer. We wanted to ship samples of this to a number of processing plants to see how it processed. And again, we weren't able to do it because we couldn't take it out of the mine.
The Colorado Reclamation mining representatives, have they been underground at the Sunday complex?
No, they came out and inspected the mine when we were operating, but they did not want to go underground. And now the portals are closed, of course, when you close it. When we closed it after, we couldn't take the ore out. So, we can reopen them, but they're closed, and it's just can't open the gate and get in it. There's rock in front of the portals, quite a bit of it. Take a front end loader and, some work to get it out. But they didn't go into the mines, and, but I'll tell you who went in there. MSHA went in there.
That's
good. People were inspecting us, periodically, and they do a complete inspection. Of course, they're the safety division of the federal government, and they went into the mines to make sure we were complying with all the safety requirements. So, that maybe the state didn't need to go in. They looked at what we were doing on the surface, but for whatever reason, they didn't go in, and neither did the BLM. But the MSHA people did.
Well, it's good that MSHA did go in there as a federal agency, but certainly you would think that it would be beneficial for those folks at the state to drag their butt down there and take a look if they can and see that there has been something done.
Well, again, I'm not speaking for what the state should be doing, but again, they're more interested, obviously, that we're complying with the permit. The safety issues are left to MSHA, underground especially. And so the state inspects the mine to make sure that we're in compliance with all the permit requirements. And most of those, requirements relate to surface activity. I mean,
right.
and again, going underground, they're not looking for safety. They're looking for compliance with the permit. And
Sure.
it doesn't talk about how we mine or things like that. It talks about some of the equipment we're using. Well, they saw the equipment. They could come out and it was, every morning it was sitting on the surface before the miners went in there with the equipment. So, I mean, some of the equipment, some of it was left in the mine. But, I don't know if there was a need for them to go in. But, again, that was their decision. We'd been happy to take them in.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I understand about this, who handles the safety in the mines and so forth, but just for the purposes of verifying that, yes, there is activity, that would be a good start. Well, let's move over to news coming out of DC. So assuming the $150 million per year budget for uranium is approved in DC, what would be the Western timeline to produce uranium, assuming the company was awarded a contract coming out of this deal?
Well, obviously, we could turn that mine on in a matter of days and be producing ore. We could be putting ore out on the pad and shipping ore within 2 weeks. Now, we do have to ventilate the mine. We opened all the ventilation shafts and ventilated it before we started the summer, and that takes probably about 2 weeks before you access most of the mine, simply to ventilate it. But within 2 or 3 weeks, we could be producing ore in that mine. So it's not, and it's all the capital's put in, and the development work that was done this summer allows us to produce ore. We're ready to produce ore. Any requirement of the federal government or the utilities or anybody else.
Let's just assume, and I haven't seen the procurement process, how this is going to come out, but I assume it'll be based on low bid, maybe some technical merits, but so we'll see how this solicitation comes out and from what actual agency this comes out of. Maybe you can speak to the details on how these contracts or these solicitations are going to come out for bid, and then also go ahead. Yeah.
First of all, it's a proposed budget. It's not in place, and it's for fiscal year 21, which starts in October of 20. Right. And so I don't think any agency is going to do anything until there's a budget approved by Congress for this. People say, oh, this is good, but, that it's only a proposed budget. And we know what happens with proposed budgets. It goes back and forth between the administration and Congress. And finally, many times they operate without a budget, but finally, generally, they approve a budget. And then the agencies, go about, spending the budgeted amounts. So I don't think anything's going to happen. Nobody's even going to design a program until there's an approved budget, or Trump announced there isn't going to be approved budget. And that's not going to be until after October. So he announces, okay, I'm going ahead under, executive order or whatever they do, and tells one of the departments, it'd probably be the Department of Energy, to line up the buying program. And as with government contracting, they always go out for bids. I mean, that's typically what they do. And how they qualify those things, they'll have to decide what their criteria are. But I suspect, if anybody's expecting any uranium to be shipped to the federal government in the next year, I think it's wishful thinking. It won't happen because of the process. So here we are about a year from now, maybe they'll be ready to go out and maybe award some bids. Well, and then people will start producing, say, a year from now in mid-2021. So again, they're going to go for bids, and they're probably going to buy the cheapest. And if you listen to all of the other producers in the United States, they all have about the same price requirement to go into production. And with $150 million, nobody's going to start any new mines. It's not enough money. What does it buy? Maybe 2 million pounds. I listened to Mark Chalmers, which you interview and others interview him, and he's basically saying the U.S. needs $60+ dollars. So it's easy to calculate. If you got $150 million, how many pounds does that buy at $60 plus? Only a little over 2 million pounds. And there's not going to be any new mines started on a 1-year program. Now, the proposed budget says for 10 years, but that doesn't mean there's going to be a contract for 10 years. It's going to be a 1-year deal. This is not a long-term solution to the uranium industry. The long-term solution is the world prices go up.
Yeah,
you listen to Cameco, who was a great producer, And they basically say, yeah, the prices have to go up. There's not going to be worldwide production until the prices go up. And what level, who knows? But that's the solution ultimately. And if the U.S. industry can survive for a few years on government purchases, that's great. And we're certainly for the government doing something. But this is not the panacea that the 232 was looking to, the petition that Energy Fuels and UR Energy filed. They were looking for, quotas, a certain amount to be purchased by U.S. utilities over a period of time. And that hasn't happened. I'm not saying it couldn't be revisited or Trump could do something. I don't know. Of course, the working committee set up, there's a number of recommendations into Trump, and nobody knows. We haven't seen those yet. So again, this might not be the only thing the president does, but it might be the start. So everybody's still waiting to see, okay, what does happen with the U.S. industry? And it's right now it's not certain. So best thing to do is, like everybody is holding and keeping your costs as low as you can. And we're one of the lowest costs for the number of reserves we have of any company in the U.S. You can take a look at our cash burn versus the other companies that have projects that could, be put in production fairly quickly.
Yeah, we haven't had Chalmers on the show, I think, for almost a year now. And one of the things that I just have had, we've pointed out before in our newsletter and also on Twitter, that you have a process to go through first of getting the budget approved, which, by the way, this is an election year. That may not even happen. And then for anything beyond this election year, depending on who gets elected, this whole 10-year plan may get completely reversed and destroyed. And so there's a lot of obstacles, including the solicitation process. And then, of course, delivery time frames, how much and who gets awarded technical capability, delivery time windows, and all this other stuff. So, yeah, 2020, there ain't shit happening.
Yeah, you've got it right on, I believe.
I think that's the case. And this is a sideshow. George, as you spoke, this is a sideshow. This is not the solution to the big market. And obviously, we know that the long-term contracting from the utilities is the big show, the big event that's coming down the pipe, and not necessarily this nuclear fuel group, which, by the way, so far has been a bit of a clown show going through from 232 to this nuclear fuel working group. I mean, it's just been a bunch of noise, really, with no definitive direction, in my opinion. Well, let's move over to production capital needs. Let's just make an assumption, George, that we're in 2021, and at this point, there are some contracts coming out, and let's just make some assumptions that uranium price is doing better. How much would the company need to go into uranium and vanadium production? And what would be the key driver, George, for the company to make that decision, assuming that there are no mining permit issues?
Clearly, the price of uranium, vanadium, or a combination of them is a key. If you got vanadium going up substantially again, then the uranium price may not need to. So it's a combination, since we produce both in the same rock. So again, it's a combination of the two commodities reaching a level that we can make money. And so the capital cost is very limited, because basically we opened the mine, and you can see we're going to come out with our financials, but we have come out with our quarterly financials and reported what we spent in there. But the mine is ready to go, and we did it with a contractor. We hired a contractor who brought his own equipment, so we didn't have to gear up and buy a lot of mining equipment. That keeps your capital down. We have a little bit of mining equipment that the company owns, but not enough to operate 4 mines. So the contractor brought all his equipment. And so that's what we would probably do, is we'd probably use a contractor who already has his equipment. And so we don't have the capital cost of equipment, because there's virtually no capital to open the mine, because it's all there and ready to go. So the capital cost is insignificant if we use a contractor. Now, a contractor charges you more than you can do it for yourself, because he's got to recover the cost of his equipment. But in the short term, that's a better way to do it, because you don't have the big outlay of capital up front. And especially if there's only going to be a one-time purchase of 2 million pounds of uranium, we don't want to go out and buy a whole lot of equipment and have it sit idle for the next number of years until the world price goes up. So, our capital cost is almost zero if we use a contractor. Now, again, to stockpile and get the ore ready and get enough to process at a plant, we've got inventory cost. It depends on what kind of arrangement we have with a processing plant, whether it's simply they're going to buy the ore from us, or whether they process under a milling agreement. So that hasn't been determined yet. But there's several ways to turn it into final product to sell to the government, because the government could also do a program to buy ore, which is not a bad idea. And that was one of the suggestions to the working group. I don't know if you knew that, but we and some other independent companies submitted some recommendations saying the government doesn't need yellow cake. Why don't you just stockpile ore, uranium ore? Because it'd be a lot cheaper. And milling ore, once you have it in mind, is easy, okay? And even building a new mill, if the government dictated and decided they needed uranium quickly, they could build a new mill within a year. So milling of the ore is not the big issue. It's basically producing it. So if you shut down the mines, that's where most of the capital cost is. So we suggested, and again, whether this makes it in the recommendation, was simply the government could stockpile ore. And they used to do that. Used to buy ore. And you could have a uranium ore stockpile to satisfy the strategic need of the U.S. And you'd buy a lot more because you don't have the ultimate cost right now of milling it. And the government doesn't need yellow cake right now. I think the reports that came out said the Department of Energy has enough, processed uranium to last for a while. So again, we think that there's other things rather than buying processed ore, but we don't know what the buying program. They may have a combination, and who knows what this is going to be. They may come out with half of that, 150 million just to buy ore from independents and stockpile it. It'd be a lot. They could buy a lot more with that, because the cost of typically, you look at the cost in the past, the mine's been about half the cost, and the milling about half the cost. So you can buy twice as much in the form of ore as you could in finished product, and then have it ready if and when you need it.
Yeah, understood. Let's just talk briefly about prices for a moment for uranium and vanadium. Let's assume that you've got 30 and 10 per pound respectively. Let's just say the market price for uranium is 30 and the market price for vanadium is 10.
Okay.
At that price point, George, would you guys be plenty comfortable to get into some kind of initial production start? And what would that production start be in terms of quantity?
Well, I think you're getting close to those values, definitely, because when you translate that into the tons, the value per ton of rock that you mine, all mining costs are in tons. It doesn't make any difference if 1 pound of uranium or 10 pounds of uranium. The costs are all in tons. Right. So we look at it as what it costs, what the value is per ton of rock that we produce for the two products. And so, one of the things that I don't want to do, we haven't had an independent analysis done of the cost. And so under SEC rules and Canadian security rules, we're not supposed to report our cost figures, okay, because they have not been confirmed by independents. So I can't tell you, yes, at those numbers we could go into production, because that's somewhat violating SEC and Canadian security law. I won't do that. I can't do that. But what I've told people in the past, you can apply what our grades are. We reported the grades, how much is in the ton of ore, uranium and vanadium. So you can get a value per ton, and then you can go and look at, what are typical hard rock underground mines in the United States? What's the cost of mining? And then you can do your own economics and decide if those numbers work. And it's not very hard to do. There are a number of people that have done it, and let them do it and put their opinion out, because they're not restricted from what their opinion is. But I am restricted from telling you what our costs are, because we have not done that independent cost. And we don't need to do it, quite frankly.
Yes, and my suspicion is the price will be there at some point. So can you speak to maybe what you guys would look for initial production in terms of amount of tons, per day you guys would be looking at operational wise?
I think the 5-mine complex easily could produce, 600-700 tons a day. Look at the production that they had back in 2009 and 10. That would be a fairly easy production number. And just operating one single shift a day. If you want to operate 2 or 3 shifts a day, you could increase that. The mines have, a large capacity. It just depends on how much the demand is. So again, I'm comfortable with 500 to 700 tons a day, and that's a significant quantity of ore. At 5 pounds of uranium per ton of rock, operating even just 5 days a week, you can calculate how many pounds we could produce of uranium. But the mines are certainly capable of that level of production based on what they've done in the past.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's go over to processing. What is the status of progressing the ablation technology that the company has? What efforts are being done there, George, and how is the application process going to get that as a potential route for you guys to process?
Well, obviously, the decision that was made by the state of Colorado to determine that ablation is a milling process, not mining. We disagree with that. And they primarily relied on the opinion of the NRC, a staff member of the NRC, without really considering history and legal precedent and everything, came up with that recommendation. So we went directly to the commission of the NRC for determination. And that's in process right now. Now, of course, anything through the NRC takes time. But we submitted, and it's, you can get online, public. We submitted our arguments, the technical aspects of this and legal arguments, why ablation, or now we call it kinetic separation, should be considered a mining process, not a milling process. So that's in front of the NRC, and how long it takes to rule on that, it's anybody's guess. So until that's done, obviously, in Colorado, we won't use the process. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't go to another state and ask that state, okay, what do you think? Because the NRC has given an advisory opinion, but they haven't told the states for sure what this is, in our opinion. So another state, Utah, Wyoming, could say, hey, we think it's a mining process. We think it's controlled under the mining regulations. But obviously, there's no reason to do that because the market isn't there yet, to use it. And we're going through the process with the NRC. And of course, we could even concede and say, okay, we don't think it takes a full milling license. It only takes a source material license. But to make the argument we think it's mining, we're not in a position right now to apply for any kind of radioactivity license through, that division of the state or the NRC. So that it's an ongoing process, and I can't say when it'll be determined. But okay. It's not crucial. If uranium and vanadium prices go to a certain level, we don't need to use that process. It reduces the cost clearly, and it reduces the environmental impact because it reduces the quantity you have to send to a mill and put into the tailings substantially. And so, all the conventional mines, in the U.S. ought to be looking at this, and so should the environmentalists say this is good. If you're going to mine uranium, you ought to use this process because it reduces that the toxic waste or the toxic tailings is the worst part of uranium production. It's coming out of the mill, and that's why they have these highly engineered sales to put the waste material in. And if you can reduce that quantity of waste by 80 or 90%, that's what you should be doing.
Right.
But, the antis are not interested in the best way to do it. They're interested in not doing it all. Don't produce anything, not just uranium. They don't want any kind of mining. They'd shut down gold mining, silver mining, all kinds of mining. They're against everything. Virtually every industrial process. They don't want anything to happen. I don't know where we get these materials if they have their way, but that's if you look at their agenda, it's not just uranium mining, and it's not just mining in general. It's everything.
Yeah, clearly misinformed, and to convince regulators about a process that happens on site, whether or not you're using ablation technology or whether or not you have a screen plant on site and you're simply screening materials, that just to me is you've got a bit of a clown show at the regulator level, and it's a sad state of affairs. Let's leave it at that.
Right.
Now, the ablation technology, George, you guys have a multi-million-dollar valuation stated on the balance sheet with no change to that value going back a couple of years. Can you give me your thoughts on that valuation, and is it representative to actual value?
Yeah, the actual value, if we put this into production and start licensing to others, could be much, much higher. So we're carrying the value that we basically when we acquired the technology. So it's carried pretty much at cost, if that's how the accountants and auditors do it. And they've looked at it each year and say, well, I guess that's still valid because nobody has said it's not worth that. If you could not use it for some reason in the United States, then maybe the value would go down, but it still could be used around the world. Could be a technology we could sell, but again, or sell or license. So, what we carry on the books is nobody's come in and said, okay, what is the ultimate value of this? The auditors look at it every year in their impairment calculation, and they've been satisfied that we're carrying a proper value, but it's simply a number on the books, and that related to what we bought and how we valued the acquisition of Black Range minerals when we acquired them.
Okay. And so we've talked about ablation as a potential method for processing. Can you talk about, are there any ongoing discussions related to some type of toll mirroring agreement with Energy Fuels elsewhere? Are you looking at another plan besides ablation? What's your thoughts?
We're looking always at alternates where to process. And sure, discussions with Energy Fuels, there's no active discussions right now. I wouldn't say there are, but it could be. Probably see Mark up in Toronto in a week and basically bring it up. We talk to them off and on about what their plans are. We listen to what they say their plans are. In one of their recent interviews, Mark did say, in the past, the mill has bought substantial quantities and toll milled for others. That's one way to fill up the mill. And of course, they don't probably have the capacity in their existing developed and licensed mines to anywhere come near filling up that mill. And so they would be far better off under some arrangement with other independents of taking ore, whether it's just buying the ore outright or whether it's milling. They would be better to use the capacity of the mill and make some money than sit there and use a very small part of the mill for their own ore. And just take a look at, that's a big mill. It takes a lot of ore. I was with the company that built that mill. When we started that mill back in 1980, we had almost 1 million tons of ore stockpiled at that mill. And that mill, if you run it at the stated capacity, it takes 700,000 tons of ore a year. That's a lot of ore. So again, I think that Energy Fuels will be a logical candidate to take ore from not only Western, but from other independents to basically enhance the value of that mill to them and enhance their financial position. Sure, it enhances the financial position of the other companies, but there's nothing wrong with that because it probably more substantially enhances their value to use that mill and create cash flows. Because if you don't use it, it's just a drag on the company. It's a drag on Energy Fuels. It costs a lot to hold that mill together. You can take a look at their costs and their balance sheets. It's an expensive holding process. So put it into production and put it into production with everything you can. And again, if there's a big purchase by the government of 150 million, Energy Fuels likely could get a big chunk of that, but they couldn't represent they could do it quickly out of their own mind. It's just not there. And they will admit that. I mean, they go through, you can take a look at their published information, when different mines can come on, if they're permitted, if they're developed, how much money it takes. There's not secrets in this because we're public companies and they are public companies. So, I think they will certainly, consider taking ore from Western as well as any other independents and can deliver fairly quickly. In some quantities, they don't want to buy 2 or 3 tons at a time. That's not worth their while. But companies that can produce a significant quantity of ore would probably be attractive to them.
Well, we continue to promote that both companies, if possible, and all companies in the U.S. sector continue to find ways to work together that's beneficial to both shareholders of both companies, to where both companies are benefiting. That's our position on the issue. Well, George, let's speak to capital needs for 2020. Will the company be looking to do financings in 2020? And can you just speak to what you guys would expect to be spending capital-wise this year? Well,
our normal burn rate of maintaining, and I think we will open the mines and spend more. And it depends on whether we anticipate there's going to be this program going forward. We may want to open the mines and start producing some more ore and put it out on the ore pads, or maybe even ship some somewhere. So again, we've got enough cash that we wouldn't have to raise anything in 2020. If you look at our balance sheets, we've got enough cash to keep going, doing what we're doing right now. So again, anticipating obviously what we want to do with these mines may require additional cash. So we have no plans right now to raise additional capital, but that could change, and it could change based on what we perceive and how the market is perceived. obviously. If the uranium price seems to be going up, or if there seems the government's going to do a program, then everybody's got to get ready. And you want to basically be in a position to produce as much as you can, as soon as you can, into that program. And so spending a little bit and anticipating that's probably a good idea. And we haven't made that decision, but I'm constantly looking at the market, looking at the demands and things like that, and our share price, obviously. As our share price, increases, it's more likely we should do a capital raise. As you take a look, a number of the uranium companies have already done capital raises. I see Energy Fuels did one. Just did $16 million. And, there's been a number of them, Laramide and, of the U.S. companies have taken advantage of raising a little bit of capital now. And so, we won't raise significant amounts beyond what we need, but we might raise some. But again, we have not decided yet.
And George, can you update us on the cash position today and also current shares outstanding and the current major shareholders?
We've got about 30 million shares outstanding. I'm the major shareholder. Widespread through the other shareholders, I don't think anybody's got more than 2 or 3% other than myself. Cash position, we have about $1.5 million. Take a look at that. We're working on the financials right now. We got a little bit more than that, but say $1.5 million to $2 million in the bank. We raised $3.5 million last spring, and we spent a good chunk of that on the mining effort. You can take a look at our financials that we put out for the quarter, but we spent and are spending. It's no secret these ore pads are costing us a bit over $100,000, but it's expenditure well made. So again, it's money spent on the mining primarily and holding the properties together. Our administrative expenses are not. We've got 2.5 employees. For a company that holds mines like we do and resources, that's almost unheard of. I'm an employee. Our CFO is an employee, and we've got a part-time operations guy, and that's it. And to the other extent, we use contractors, which you can turn on and off as you need them. So, I know companies like Energy Fuels have to have a lot bigger staff because they have the mill, they have a lot of other things. They've got overheads in Denver and everything else. We don't have any of that stuff. We don't have an office anywhere. We all work out of our own homes or, home offices. We don't need an office. That keeps the cost down. So the key is during this period of low prices, you got to minimize what it costs to hold your company together. And I think everybody tries to do that. And we do the same thing. So, that's what investors are saying. Hey, don't spend the money when there's no need to. But there may be some encouraging news that comes out, in the near future that says, hey, you got to spend more. And to spend more, we would have to raise some.
Yeah, and I think you pointed out some key advantages that Western has over some U.S. peer companies. You just pointed out a number of items. I want to move on to another question. Merger acquisition considerations, George. Is there anything you can share with us here? And is the company considering any deals for acquisitions or mergers at this point?
We're always looking. We're always looking at assets out there. In fact, that's one of the things that I do quite a bit, and we get proposals. I look at a lot of especially for acquisitions of small things. And I talk to a lot of our peer companies, on a regular basis to see if there's some benefit to the shareholders of the companies to do a merger or an acquisition. I'm for any of that benefits the shareholders. And I do think that there should be some more acquisitions or mergers in this space because we've got a number of smaller companies in the U.S. And to be strong, basically, you need size. And it makes sense. Over the years, Energy Fuels has done a number of acquisitions, and I think it's made it a stronger company. Some of the others have been a little reluctant to do it because of low valuations. But I see that maybe changing. Maybe this is the year where you get some of these mergers and acquisitions that make a lot of sense for the shareholders. And I'm all for that. I'd be happy to merge or, acquire if the right deal came along with anybody. There's no reason. I'm this, the biggest shareholder. I'm in it for shareholder value. I've been in and out of this industry for a long time, and the whole key is to make money for the shareholders. And again, how we do that, if it's an acquisition of Western, I'd support it in a minute. At the right valuation, if the shareholders agree to it, it's great. I think that would be the way to go. So I look for some activity in 2020, whether it's we're involved in it or whether it's other companies, but I think some things will be happening this year.
Give us your thoughts on the vanadium market, George. Where do you see the price this year? And then do you guys see that the current prices are sufficient for the company to continue to do some work on the vanadium front? And with that, the vanadium samples, those have not been sent out because of the permitting issues. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And so, yeah, the vanadium market's, now what, a little under $6 if you look at European and Chinese market for vanadium, and it skyrocketed over the last year and a half. We're probably at the low point. It goes up a little, goes down a little bit, but we see that the market's stabilizing, in the $9 or $10 range. Obviously you've got the problem with what China is having now, steel production. That's primarily where vanadium is used, but that's going to correct itself. This virus is going to be, controlled and contained. So vanadium will be in demand again. And I think if we can get a stabilized price in that range, then the price can be maintained in that range. It's gone down for various reasons. And part of it was the extremely high price and the switch of some vanadium to niobium. And of course, that's a commodity that has a fairly stable price. It's not, from what I read, as good in alloying steel as vanadium, but it works. And so rather than paying $20-some for vanadium, you can buy niobium at, $8 or $10, whatever it is. And you can do almost the same thing. But so again, I think vanadium is coming back. It's going to go back up to a reasonable price. It probably won't go back up into the 20s. I think the battery use is slowly coming on. It's not going to drive the demand quickly. So vanadium is going to be stable. But again, if you look at $8 to $10 vanadium, that's pretty good for high-grade vanadium mines. I don't think it's a high enough price to bring on a lot of vanadium production around the world either. So that's the other thing is, all these vanadium producers are going to come on when you got high vanadium prices. They're not going to come on. Nevada's high-cost production. At $8 or $10, it makes no sense to spend the capital, nor even the transport production cost in low-grade vanadium deposits. And ours is, of course, a high-grade vanadium deposit, which also has uranium. So it'd be one of the lowest-cost vanadium producers in the world. And, Energy Fuels have got the same thing. I think they're seeing the same thing, but there's no reason for Energy to turn on and sell at $5 when they've got a resource that probably can be sold at $10 in the fairly near future.
Yeah, very well. I appreciate your thoughts and comments on that. Now, back to uranium. Have you been in contact with any nuclear utilities? If so, what kind of pricing or time information have they provided in terms of establishing new long-term contracts? Can you update us on that side?
Well, I'm in contact with the utilities all the time. I go to the conferences, I talk to them, and primarily the U.S. utilities, are simply buying uranium. They've got some long-term contracts they're fulfilling. And they're looking at the market, obviously when they should go out for the new contracts. And Cameco has announced that they've seen an increase in the, contracting, and I don't know what it is, but, Cameco is probably the lead company out there for long-term contracts, especially for U.S. utilities. And so I look at what Cameco is announcing. So there's some things going on, and maybe it's stepping up, but I haven't seen the utilities step up and say, we'll sign a $60 long-term contract. That's beyond their capability right now. When you got a $25 market, the utility isn't going to sign a $60 contract. But where they're willing to sign a contract, I don't know. I haven't signed any contracts. But, I think the utilities are constantly looking at when and at what level they should buy uranium. But again, they're under a lot of pressure to keep their uranium fuel cost as low as they can. And so apparently they can buy what they need right now at the spot price of 25, or somewhere between 24 and 25. So there must be supplies available from somewhere, at least now. And that could change. And if you take a look at a lot of the commenters on this market, they say, the supplies are going away fairly quickly. And so the demand is not going to be able to be met. It could cause a spike in the uranium price. It has before. And so it might again. And the utilities are kind of caught because of the regulators saying, hey, you're paying too much for uranium. can't pass it on to the consumer. So utilities are going to pay what they have to get it, but they're not going to overpay. That's my attitude and what I get from the utilities, and I go along with them. I say that's reasonable.
Yeah, I would say that punch bowl at the party is starting to run dry, and I think we've got some interesting times coming once the punch bowl runs out, and I think that we've got some issues when that disruption comes. Now, George, I want to just move over to G&A for a moment. Can you speak to the compensation increases to some of the management? Why the increases while the market continues to be difficult and share prices continue to be under pressure?
Well, you can see the only one that, they raised my compensation because it was way underneath what the peers are getting, And again, as my interest in the company, I used to own 50% of the company and work for nothing. Now I own a substantially less share, so I don't work for nothing, okay? And so my compensation went up. Again, I think everything else has stayed the same. But also, you take a look at my responsibility has gone up considerably. Starting mines, when we got our permit for explosive permits from the federal government, that permit is in my name. I am responsible for the explosives, so I do far more than a CEO of an exploration company. I'm really the one that's over all the mining, even though I've got a mining guy. So I do a lot more. Again, and the board decided that I should have my compensation increased, for my additional responsibility, and whether it's reasonable or not. But again, you take a look at what other CEOs are making; it's far more on the basis of what they do than what I get. I'm the one that's responsible to MSHA. If something goes wrong at that mine, I've got all the responsibilities as a CEO. I mean, it's not just the explosive lights. That's just an example.
Sure.
But since we have such a small staff, I'm the one that has to do it all. I'm the one that visits the mine quite often. And also, I'm the one that's on the road with the investors. We don't have an IR guy. I am the IR guy.
Speak to that, because what is the, I haven't looked at it recently, but what was the increase and what is your salary now?
I was making $180,000. I make $220,000.
Okay.
I had a small award of options and no bonus, but that was my compensation. The options, some people complain, but, the options were primarily granted to our board. The board doesn't make much, and so they thought, well, it's not right to grant options to the board without giving me some options. So, again, the year before, I I didn't take any options and gave it all to the board and to the staff. But the board thought, well, it looks better if you take some options. It shows, obviously, you take an option, it's out of the money. It shows that you're expecting the price to go up. So there's some good things about having options that are above the market and, encouraging your management and your board to drive the value of this thing up. I've got a number of options. Almost all of them are not in the money. They're not. So, but again, that's my compensation. It's not a secret. And again, if there's somebody that can do this, what I do, as well or better than me at a lower price, have at it. I'd be happy to resign and turn it over to somebody else. But, I don't think you can find anybody that, has been in the industry and can do it. It just, sooner or later you might find somebody, but the industry is so thin on management because it's been non-existent in the U.S. But I could probably make more money doing something else rather than this. But I do own a big chunk of the company that keeps me very much interested and involved.
Well, I appreciate you addressing that, and it sounds like you just invited applicants to apply. So send George your resume, folks, and they'll take a look at it. George, I wanted one more question on G&A. So as this market drags on and G&A costs are ongoing, how does Western plan to motivate and keep staff in the company? I know it's a short staff, but how do you guys plan to do that?
Well, I think the hope that this industry is going to come back is what keeps our staff around. If they thought this industry was dying, they'd probably all go out and find other things to do. But again, I think they all want to be in this industry and believe in it. Believe uranium's coming back, and there's going to be a real future for people that stay in this industry. The young guys that work for the company, they like what they're doing and they like the industry. And so what motivates them is primarily, I don't give them a lot of motivation in the way of money. I mean, they get paid well. I mean, but they're not overpaid. And the motivation is the fact that they want to be in this industry, and they think there's going to be rewards for the people that stay in it if you can last for the next number of years. And so that's the motivation, I think, of the key people in this company. And they're as motivated now as they were a few years ago, even maybe more so. Simply, they see things happening. They listen to the interviews, and they see what everybody's doing and what the federal government and what Trump is doing. I mean, it's positive, from the standpoint, at least it sounds like something's going to happen. And so that probably motivates them. So it's not too hard to keep them motivated. It's a little company. It's good working conditions. We didn't have any problems getting over the contractor getting the miners with 10 or 12 people coming into the mine. They liked it, and it was only a short-term deal with them because we couldn't keep producing ore because we couldn't take it out. But, the miners were certainly motivated and did a great job. That's a good part of it. We have no trouble finding and opening mines. And I just talked to the contractor the other day. If we decide to open the mine here in a month, he's ready to go. Miners are ready to go. There's, take a look. Energy Fuels just laid off a number of people, which was too bad. But those people, slowly will be absorbed into other industries if the mining industry can't find jobs for them. But hopefully they can stay in mining because they like it. Hopefully they can stay in the area. But again, limited jobs in the areas where they laid them off.
George, some of our audience wanted to know what you will be doing on the traveling and conference front over the next few months, and will you be doing an interview with Crux investor in the future?
Yes, definitely. I will be in Toronto for the PDAC meeting. There's that in about 2 weeks, and I will be up there for that. I will be doing a number of interviews up there. Definitely. I think I've got 5 interviews scheduled for that during the conference up there, and that's a good time to do it. And then travel after that, obviously. We're looking at what conferences to go to and what's the best way to spend limited amounts of money on investor outreach. That's the thing. We'll use social media like we have and maybe increase that, which I think is good. So again, we're looking at our budget for what and how we do that. And obviously some of the stuff, going to conferences is always good. I was in Vancouver in January, now Toronto in March. And beyond that, we'll take a look. And then certainly a few things before the summertime when things kind of slow down. And we have our annual general meeting. We've had it the last 2 years in New York. Whether we're going to do it in New York or Toronto or somewhere else this year, and tie it in with conferences. We've done that, and that usually happens in June. But again, we'll look at that so that we basically combine several things with the travel.
Well, George, so with all the matters at Western that are at hand at the moment and the current share price, why should investors be taking a stake in Western today or even adding to existing positions? What would you say to potential investors?
Well, if you want, if you believe in the uranium industry, whether it's worldwide industry or the U.S., and this is the time to probably be taking a position because prices go up and down. But if anything good happens, the uranium stocks are going to go up. We saw it, when the boom in the 2006, 2007, astronomical valuations for anybody that had anything. And again, we're not there. I think all the uranium stocks are at relatively low levels. And again, investors say, well, I'll get in at the right time. And what's the right time? Nobody knows. But once it starts to move, it's going to move fairly quickly in all the shares. And if in fact there is a budget to buy that and they start awarding contracts, the shares of ones that can benefit from production are going to go up first. Companies that hold resources that can't be put into production quickly are not going to benefit as much. I'm not saying they're not going to go up. But again, uranium is one, you've got certain investors and they're risk takers. Mining is risky. Investing in mining stocks is risky, and especially junior companies that don't have cash flows. And none of us have cash flows, at least cash flows that exceed our expenses. So it's risky. And so you're betting on a company that's going to increase in value, maybe because they're an acquisition target. That's what happened in 2006, 7, and 8. Take a look at the small companies that were acquired for astronomical valuations, and probably too much, but nonetheless it happened. And I'm not saying that'll happen at that level again, but that could happen even before cash flows. You try to consolidate the industry, and the values of the companies go up because of the possible acquisitions and mergers. So again, it's just, you need to pick the companies that seem to have a chance to make a significant amount of money in the next, few years. If you're trying to make money in the next 30 days, then you probably shouldn't be in any of the uranium stocks.
How can investors reach out to the company for more information, George?
Our website, we have that. They certainly can contact myself anytime. My contact information is on the website. I take calls from investors daily. So I'd be happy to talk to any investor, any prospective investor at any time. So if they leave me a email or if they a message, I always return either email messages or phone calls. So I'm open to talk to anybody that wants to talk about this.
George, and your favorite spirits for this time of year?
Well, I've got several. This is the winter time, so I drink a little bit more Kentucky bourbon and whiskey in the winter, and a lighter drink, gin, in the summer.
Well, George, I thank you for taking the time to update us on the company. Good luck, and looking forward to having you come back later this year.
Certainly good talking with you always. Thank you.